Welcome to the Blitzburgh Show. This is episode 3. Back this week. Last week I was not able to actually get a video done due to a personal vacation I was on. So unfortunately I was not able to go ahead and get something done for the Atlantic Falcons preseason game that we had last week. But I was able to go ahead and catch that the Colts week 3 preseason game that happened here last Saturday. And going to go ahead and review that today. Also, we're going to review some topics that have been going on with the Steelers to begin the video, and then we're going to finish up with some winner and losers from the preseason game and some inside thoughts on that Week 3 preseason game against the Colts. Alright, we all know now that Le'Veon Bell is going to be reporting here on September 1st per his announcement on, I believe it was Twitter or one of the social media sites. He announced to one of his fans that he was going to be reporting on September 1st, which shouldn't be a shocker to anybody. It's kind of something that we had anticipated ever since the contract didn't get done back in July to extend him by the deadline. You know, it's a similar situation that Eric Berry did with the Kansas City Chiefs last year, where he held out most of the preseason. Honestly, if you ask me, it's more personal gain than anything. He's got nothing to gain, professionally speaking, because he's not going to get a new contract. It's not even possible due to the deadline already passing. So he has to play on the franchise tender, or he can choose to sit out the whole NFL season, which he won't do because obviously he needs to get paid, 1, and 2, it would ruin his credibility as far as his commitment towards his team and his professional career. Now, given the fact that I personally think that it was more so the reasoning behind Le'Veon Bell not showing up to camp was because he didn't want to deal with the nuances of being at training camp, living in dorms and so on and so forth, and obviously because he wasn't going to really get much work just because he is the starter in Pittsburgh. He's not going to, be ran through like, guys like, Terrell Watson and Fitzgerald Toussaint. The guys that are fringe guys are trying to make the roster at running back. Those guys are getting the bulk of the carries because they got to prove that they deserve to be on this team, if not the practice squad. So I get that, But at the same time, the reason why I'm against Le'Veon Bell not showing up to training camp is because the Steelers are in a position like none before the last few years, where they have legitimate title consideration on the table right now, considering the pieces they have. Last year was supposed to be kind of that year, which, not to say that we didn't have the ability to make it to the Super Bowl. It's just losing Martavis Bryant and having to use that skeleton crew of a wide receivers core the entire year kind of destroyed the Steelers' hopes of really make it to the Super Bowl, and it kind of ended up being the big factor as to why they couldn't go toe-to-toe with the Patriots. I mean, a lot of people want to point the finger at the defense, which I'm not saying the defense is excused in this standpoint, but I do tend to agree with Keith Butler. The defense that we had last year, as far as the secondary is concerned, we couldn't run a man-to-man coverage scheme the entire game against the Patriots. We would have gotten eaten up alive, just like we got eaten up alive in the zone. For those people that feel like we would have made some kind of difference that the Steelers had ran man coverage in that AFC Championship game, it really wouldn't have. The Steelers just did not have the personnel at the secondary position to go ahead and be able to go toe-to-toe with the guys that the Patriots had in their receiving core, and I don't disagree with the fact the reason why they went to the zone scheme versus the man-to-man scheme. Now, my point being in that game is whenever the Steelers lost Le'Veon Bell to that groin injury, the only thing they had left really that was a legitimate threat was Antonio Brown, and we saw what the Patriots did. They pretty much triple teamed him, and most teams all year round did that same thing to the Steelers when it came to their coverage schemes against the Steelers receiving corps, just because we had nobody outside of Antonio Brown. This year that changes. We have Martavis Bryant, who still needs to be completely reinstated, which we'll find out here in the next following weeks if that actually does get done in a timely fashion where he can play against the Browns. But we also have Juju Smith-Schuster that we drafted in the second round, and then obviously Eli Rogers is still a presence there in the slot, and then you got Sammy Coates, who, for all intents and purposes, let's just say right now he's going to make the squad. He's going to make the 53-man roster, and then you have everybody else that kind of fills in the last few positions in the receiving core. Now, as far as that's relating to Le'Veon Bell and this whole situation with him reporting on September the 1st. My point being is that because the Steelers have all these pieces now, the last thing they need this offseason was a distraction, and a distraction can come from a form of a player getting suspended, a player getting hurt, which I really don't think is a distraction, it's just kind of a misfortune. But, in the form of, a player getting suspended or a player saying something foolish about his coaching staff or his teammates, or any kind of distraction that takes you away from the focus of what's at hand, which is the real possibility of the Steelers winning the Super Bowl this year, just because of what we have on the roster and everything coming together so far this offseason. So I think really this is kind of more of a selfish play by Le'Veon Bell. If you ask me personally, I think it's just causing more distraction than it needs to be this offseason. And I know a lot of people will say the opposite. Well, if he's in camp talking about, the contract situation, maybe that would be even more of a distraction. You can make that argument, but honestly, I think it's more of a distraction that he's not there just because now this has been a topic going since the deadline back in July onwards until he shows up here September 1st. So, and the real possibility could be that Le'Veon Bell comes back and he's slow to start. And if it does happen, the fans are going to really be livid because they're going to say, you know what, you had all training camp to be with the Steelers, to be practicing, to be game time ready, to get into game time situations under your belt, the little few that he would have gotten anyways, but reps nonetheless that would have gotten him a little bit, a couple more steps closer to being, full speed. And I do anticipate when he comes back week 1, it will be a little bit slow. Maybe it'll only take him a couple plays. Maybe it'll take him a few quarters. Maybe it'll take him a couple games. But he hasn't played with the team at all since last year. He didn't even get the opportunity last week to go ahead and take some snaps with Ben Roethlisberger and AB with the first-team offense, which would have been really nice for him to be able to get under his belt before the season start. But he doesn't want that. He wants to do his own thing, which is by his right to go ahead and do so since he hasn't signed his tender. So we'll see what happens. There is a lot of risk here for Le'Veon Bell if he doesn't come out here and perform here in this first week against the Browns. And the fans will be at his gate with anger and disappointment for Le'Veon Bell if he doesn't come out guns a-blazing here against the Browns in week 1. But that's that. So we'll go ahead and bury that whole situation now that he is going to be reporting on September 1st. Alright guys, on to the next topic. As most of you guys know already, the Steelers went ahead and made a trade today for tight end Vance McDonald from the 49ers. They went ahead and sent a 4th round pick in next year's draft for Vance McDonald and a 5th round pick of the 49ers in next year's draft. So pretty much they got Vance McDonald and swapped their 4th round for a 5th round, which depending on how the 49ers play this year, practically could be still the value of a 4th round just because of, if the 49ers tank again this season, then, it'd be early 5th round, so you could consider the fact that, Steelers just moved down a couple spots, considering the Steelers probably will end up with a lower draft this year, given, that they have another successful season. But moving on to the fact that the Steelers went ahead and bolstered the tight end position, this is something that I kind of foresaw coming ever since the Ladarius Green cutting. The Steelers really want to upgrade that tight end position. They really haven't found a viable option to start at that tight end position since Heath Miller retired. And, maybe we were just spoiled for so long from such consistency from Heath Miller, but we're starting to see a glaring need for that position to be upgraded. And I think the Steelers noticed it all training camp and all preseason that, the tight end position's kind of capped out on how good it could be with the personnel that we have right now. And don't get me wrong, I know there's a lot of Jesse James outlaw fans out there that love Jesse James. I don't knock against Jesse James. I just think what he is a second-string tight end. He's a second-option tight end. He's not a guy that's going to come in and be a starting tight end in this league. Maybe in a few years from now, maybe he does develop enough to be that guy. But I think with Vance McDonald, he is a starting caliber tight end. He's proven it. Yeah, the stats aren't the best, but then again, look at who he's had to work with. He's had Colin Kaepernick and Blaine Gabbert. Can you blame the guy? I mean, he hasn't had really much quarterback play to really support his athleticism and his physical traits that he brings to the position and his ability to really, produce at that position. I'll just give you an example. If you take Rob Gronkowski and put him on the 49ers with those quarterbacks. You think he's putting up the same numbers he's putting up with Tom Brady? Same damn scenario as Vance McDonald playing with Blaine Gabbert and Colin Kaepernick versus this year playing with Ben Roethlisberger. I'm not saying he's going to light up the stat sheet, but he'll probably produce a lot better than he has ever had in 49ers as he has ever had with the 49ers. So I think it is an upgrade at the position. Vance McDonald, 6'4", just under 270 pounds. Definitely got some burners on him. There's been plenty of plays I've seen so far since the trade, just YouTubing some quick bits on Vance McDonald, and he catches the ball, and he's really good at picking up that yards after catch, and that's something the Steelers haven't had in a while since Heath Miller retired. I mean, Jesse James is kind of one of those guys where he catches and almost somewhat falls down. I mean, I don't think he does it intentionally, but he just doesn't have the same athleticism that Vance McDonald brings to the table. And don't get me wrong, the reference I made earlier to Rob Gronkowski, I'm not saying Vance McDonald can produce like Rob Gronkowski does for New England with Tom Brady. I'm just saying he's going to produce better than Jesse James probably will this year, given if Jesse James was a starter for full 16 games versus Vance McDonald starting for the Steelers for full 16 games. I just think Vance McDonald brings more to the vertical passing game, and I think he brings more to the blocking game. I mean, Jesse James has really struggled to really develop himself into a consistent blocker. I'm not saying that he can't block. I'm just saying his consistency at blocking hasn't been there since he's been with the Steelers, and he's gotten a little better. I'll give him credit, but the problem is a little better doesn't get you to starter better. And right now, Vance McDonald does that. He's a starting tight end that has good blocking ability. He's able to go ahead and be a vertical threat in the passing game. He's got position flexibility as far as being an inline tight end or a split-out tight end. He's done it a lot with the 49ers. Did it a lot with at Rice. And I believe when he was in college at Rice, he actually converted from wide receiver to tight end. So that's kind of where that athleticism comes from. Now, a lot of the backlash I'm hearing and seeing as this trade has panned out is that the guy's got drop issues. Well, some of the stats I'm seeing and some of the drops he's had were a lot of bad throws too. I mean, I'm not saying he hasn't had legitimate drops, but what receiver hasn't? So I think you might see a different Vance McDonald than what a lot of people are insinuating or is going to be what we're getting in this trade. I think he's going to be a better player than a lot of people expect. And, a lot of people, from the 49ers side, are jumping in joy thinking, we just got out of that behemoth of a contract. The guy got paid $35 million for a reason. I mean, don't get me wrong, the GM's not there anymore. But, they don't put just idiots in GM positions in the NFL. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of them that make bonehead moves, but these guys are intelligent football minds that, when they make these kind of moves, they got some kind of insight as to why they believe that they should invest so much into a player. So obviously Vance McDonald has enough talent to warrant that kind of magnitude of a contract, or in that kind of ballpark of the $35 million extension he got with the 49ers. And let me remind you too, the Steelers can be off the hook on this contract, and I believe it's in May or April of 2018. So pretty much they can just ride this out as a rental trade, use him this year, and see what he does. And if he puts up gaudy numbers, then maybe we restructure his contract or just keep his contract and move forward with him at tight end. But, I mean, by all intents and purposes, this is not something that Steelers are cemented into as far as the contract is concerned. So I think it's a win-win situation. The Steelers got to upgrade at tight end before the season started, and they don't have to fully commit to this guy in his contract moving forward after this year. So I like the trade. I like the move, and to kind of, steer off a little bit away from Vance McDonald and just in the trade talks and everything, I would really like to see the Steelers trade for a cornerback. I think I speak for a lot of Steelers fans, and I have not been impressed with what we've seen in the secondary so far this preseason and training camp. And I think, adding another legitimate body, I'm not talking about a Justin Gilbert or, Deshaun Phillips or Brandon Boykin. I'm talking about a legitimate, tandem cornerback that could run with with Artie Burns, and just kind of throw this bone out there. I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen just because of all the stipulations that would go behind a deal getting done for this guy, and that would be Joe Hayden. He's out there, and the Browns are aggressively shopping him. The only problem is he's looking to be making $11 million this next year. We can't afford to pay a guy like him $11 million for what he would bring to the table, but I think he's an immediate upgrade versus Ross Cockrell or Cody Sensabaugh at the opposite side with Artie Burns. It's just getting the numbers done right for that kind of trade, and given that it's an interdivision trade, I just don't ever see it happening. But just kind of throw that name out there because in the dream scenario, I would love to see him get traded to the Steelers for the right price, but that's in a dream scenario. So this is reality, and the reality is that the Steelers have probably made their last trade of the offseason, and that's Vance McDonald, which we should all be excited for. I think he's got a lot of upside, and any fans that are down on him, trust me, he just adds to the pool of tight ends we got now. And if you're okay with the tight ends we got right now, then you don't have really high expectations for the tight end group in this offense, in which the tight end position can be the key factor in this offense, really taking that step to that legendary status of, the greatest show on turf. That's how good this offense can be, but, you got to be hitting on all cylinders, and the tight end position is one of those cylinders. All right, guys, we're going to go into the winners and losers for a Week 3 preseason game against the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to start off with the winner side. First winner I've got is Xavier Grimble. He's displayed a lot of key factors that he had to add to his resume this offseason to really establish himself as that third tight end. I think he did so, barring the fact that Vance McDonald is now a member of the Steelers, so maybe that may not be the case anymore, but nonetheless, he's going to be in this winners column because of what he did in that game, and he did a lot of legitimate blocking, sound blocking. I remember one play he took Terrell Basham and pretty much, made him his little you-know-what, and he had a pretty good combative catch for a touchdown in this game too, so it's a win for Xavier Grimble, a much needed one. I don't know, given the circumstances now with Vance McDonald added to the tight end group, I think he's kind of on the fence again. It's going to be between him and David Johnson. Just depends on what the Steelers want to do. Do they want to keep the athletic receiving threat tight end as the number 3, or they want to keep that sound blocking tight end in David Johnson? It should be interesting to see what happens in this last week against the Carolina Panthers in Week 4 preseason game, and I think that's two guys that you should be watching here in this Week 4 game, because I think they're both going to be playing for their roster spot here against the Carolina Panthers. Now my next winner is going to be Terrell Watson and John Connor. I'm putting them both together because they both kind of both had a solid, similar game, and they're both running back. So obviously I'm just going to bundle those guys together. But Terrell Watson was definitely a nice piece of work from him, playing against the Indianapolis Colts. Very tough runner. I didn't know much about this guy whenever the Steelers brought him on this offseason, but he's definitely showing up and he's showing what he can do, and the guy is tough. I mean, he had a screenplay where he picked up big yardage on, I believe, on a 3rd and long, and he's showing that he can be a viable back coming out on passing plays and catching the ball. So, and that's essential now in today's NFL. You can't be just a running back that can just run the ball. You got to be a guy that can catch the ball and move the ball that way too. So, and John Connor, he just put together another game. I mean, he's really establishing himself as a sound option to be the number 2 behind Le'Veon Bell. Honestly, right now, I'd be kind of surprised if the season ever comes around and he's not the guy spelling Le'Veon Bell. I think he's done enough versus what Niall Davis has done to show that he should be that guy spelling Le'Veon Bell. So another solid performance from John Connor. Just wish that we could see a little bit more of his running game in between the tackle and guards there. I'd like to see a little bit more just ground and pound from John Connor. Seems like he's making more dazzle from those outside runs, breaking it off the tackle towards the outside, which isn't nothing wrong with that. Positive yardage is part of positive yardage, but with his size and his strength, being a power runner, I like to see him do a little bit more what Terrell Watson does, which Watson has done really well running between the tackles and really just putting his head down and grinding out those, 4 to 5 yard runs, which, obviously are substantial in a game, especially when you're trying to wear down a defense and going into the later portion of the game, physically just draining them with those power running backs. So good game from both of those guys. So excited to see what they do here in this last preseason game. We should be able to see both of them. I would hope that they feature Terrell Watson in this last game against Carolina Panthers, because he's one of those guys that I really think he's got a chance to make this roster with the way he's performed this offseason and preseason. So excited to see if he can put on another solid game against Carolina Panthers and earn himself a spot on this roster. My next winner is going to be AB and Big Ben. The reason why they're winners here is just because of the fact of the matter is their ability to just, come into that game and pick off like they just, last week played in the AFC Championship against the Patriots in Foxborough. And they just had that continuity going, and they're all both on the same page. Ben was making throws in pockets that, most quarterbacks wouldn't try to force that throw unless, they had that continuity with that receiver. And obviously Big Ben and AB probably have the best, quarterback-wide receiver relationship in the NFL as far as trust is concerned. And we saw that on display, obviously. Ben was putting some mustard on his throws and some tight spots, and then obviously AB just, the king of yak, the guy, once he gets the ball in his hand, he'll do whatever he can to go ahead and turn that ball, take that ball and make it into a punt return and take it to the house. And, he showed some of that again in that game against Indianapolis Colts. So just nice to see both those guys on the same page. Good to go for the season, and we probably won't see them here against Carolina Panthers, which we shouldn't. And I'd rather it be that way just because, you don't want any mishaps or injuries happening in that last week. Let those guys rest. They've shown they're good to go on the same page and should be ready for week 1 against the Browns. Now my last winner is going to be Cameron Sutton, the rookie cornerback out of Tennessee. Finally got to see him play. He was out with a bum leg for a couple weeks there, so we didn't really get to see much of him this preseason. But he practiced this past week and was able to actually suit up for that Indianapolis Colts game. Wasn't a stellar game by any means. He didn't do nothing to light up the stat sheet, but he did a few key things to go ahead and show that he's got potential, and he's going to grow in this defense, and he's going to move forward. And he flashed some good awareness and good play on some key downs. I mean, he had a third down pass breakup that was pretty solid. He was on pace with that receiver going, I think it was on an out route, and he just played the ball perfectly. And then there was another situation where he kind of goofed on the play and he let up a third down pass. So, I mean, you got to give and take with these young guys. I mean, as long as they show some kind of sign of positive play, you got to take what you can get, especially with these guys being so fresh, and they'll just get better as they play. So, put him in the winner column just because he was healthy and he was good to go, and he showed some of that ability that justified why he was drafted by the Steelers in the 3rd round. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the loser side. I'm going to start off with the entire secondary, starting secondary for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, this has been, outside of the first week when we played in the preseason, we had a pretty solid outing from our secondary. Since then, it's been terrible. Week 2 and week 3, our starting secondary has been torched, and I know Mike Mitchell hasn't been there, which, he is a key cog to the secondary. But Ross Cockrell's getting eaten up. It's not a good sign right now going into the season, seeing how Ross Cockrell is just getting his lunch taken from him week in and week out. This is why the Steelers went ahead and decided that this week that he was going to split reps with Cody Sensabaugh, rightfully so, because we got to figure out something opposite of Artie Burns, because right now I'm scratching my head who's going to be playing against, or not playing against, but playing with Artie Burns come here week 1, and it's kind of a little bit unsettling, to be honest with you, because Steelers have got to find an answer. We've got 1 more week left, and they got to figure out who's that starting guy is going to be. And right now, seeing how Ross Cockrell played, I don't think it'll be him. I mean, he's been very shaky this entire entire preseason, and it's not looking good right now. And I'm not saying Cody Sensabaugh is the answer, but I haven't seen enough of Cody Sensabaugh to say that he can't be better than Ross Cockrell. Also, I can't say that he can be better than Ross Cockrell, but the Steelers are doing the same thing. They're doing their due diligence. They're going to go ahead and put Cody Sensabaugh out there, and they're going to see what this guy's got, see if he can be a starter opposite of Artie Burns. So I think this last week's going to be fun to watch the starting cornerbacks in the secondary and see how they do against the Carolina Panthers, and see if we can find somebody that's going to start opposite of Artie Burns, because I just don't think Ross Cockrell's it. So my next loser is Justin Hunter. I had a lot of high hopes for Justin Hunter this year. He was tearing up in training camp. I loved the signing when it happened. Unfortunately, he's in a crowded group, probably one of the most crowded groups in the entire NFL with the Steelers receiving corps. And unfortunately, he's just not getting on the field. This is a clear-cut sign that the Steelers are just, they probably have seen what they needed to see out of Justin Hunter at this point, and they've made their assessment. We'll see in this last preseason game if he gets some substantial time. It may be his last chance to really show that he could put it on the field. He's done it in training camp and practice, but we all know it doesn't matter if you're doing it in practice. It matters if you're doing it in the game. And Justin Hunter's just not doing that right now. He's not putting the stats up in the games, and he's kind of killing himself as far as his hopes of being on this roster as a wide receiver with the Steelers. And he's not getting any special teams play either, so he's not even getting that particular part of the game to kind of solidify his spot on the roster. So he's got to solely rely on his receiving game, and it's not been there these past 3 weeks in the preseason. So I hope to see him a lot in this Carolina Panthers preseason finale game, but I'm thinking that's probably not going to happen, but we'll see. But he's a loser just because he had another chance to prove himself in the little time he had against the Indianapolis Colts. He dropped a pass, and it is what it is. It is what it is. All right, my third loser is Jesse James. Didn't do anything at all in this third preseason game against the Indianapolis Colts. Didn't get any targets, didn't get any catches. Really didn't do nothing to really wow you. And, given the Vance McDonald trade, I think the Steelers had just had enough of, the Jesse James project of getting him in as the starting tight end. So, unfortunately for him, it looks like he's going to be the number 2 as soon as Vance McDonald gets up to speed and is ready and comfortable with the playbook, and the Steelers are comfortable with him. So, unfortunately for Jesse James, he falls into the loser column today. And my fourth and final loser is going to be Alejandro Villanueva. It's really hard watching him in this game. I mean, he, for lack of better words, he just looked terrible. He looked horrible in this game. I hope that, it's kind of like last year. It's just a slow start, and he gets into his groove sooner rather than later. And, plays at that level that we saw him play the back half of last year. But in that game against the Colts, he did not look good at all. He just looked slow getting to the edge to get those outside edge rushers. And there's one play where he completely allowed John Simon on the Indianapolis Colts to go ahead and whiff right past him on the outside edge for a clear shot at Ben Roethlisberger. Thank God Roethlisberger, didn't get injured or anything. But those kind of things, those are alarming, because during the season you're going to be going against the top edge rushers. And not saying John Simon's not one of those guys, but if you're doing it now in the preseason, or you're going to be doing it during the regular season, Ben Roethlisberger ain't going to be able to take too many of those shots throughout the year. So we got to limit those blindside hits and letting those guys screaming off the edge go untouched. So hopefully this is just Alejandro Villanueva's engine starting up slow, and get it up to speed here soon. But he's got to go in the loser column because he just looked terrible against the Indianapolis Colts. All right, guys, that's all I got for this week. I'm going to go ahead and post another video here next week after the Carolina Panthers season finale. I'll probably go ahead and wait till they go ahead and announce the 53-man roster cut down, see who we got, who we don't, discuss those players that got cut and the ones that they kept, and probably go ahead and put that out probably a day or two after they go ahead and announce that. So be on the lookout next week for that video. Thanks for listening today, and go Steelers.